We got to make mention on the program here of Dusty Hill of ZZ Top passed away this past week. And 72 years old, and that blew my mind. I'm like, he was 12 years older than me. They've always looked, because of the beard gimmicks, right? They've always looked older than they actually were. And, but I guess I don't know whether I thought they were 90 something or whatever, but you know what I'm saying. Appearances were deceiving. But okay, here, Mr. Music Man, has there ever been in rock and roll a band that lasted that long with the same lineup?
Well, with the same lineup.
Yeah, see, that's therein lies.
And when you say lasted that long, they broke up in 1970 and had a comeback in 2015, and now.
Well, I don't even know if there's anybody there that has there ever been a band from start to finish, even with a hiatus in the middle, that was the same lineup, no added people, no subtracted people, for that long. 52 years or whatever?
Well, it's certainly up there.
That's because you're stumped, right? I'll take that as a no.
Because I don't want to just start throwing out names. I mean, the Monks reunited in the 90s. Not that you'd be familiar with the Monks.
Who?
The Monks. They were 5 GIs that shaved their head like monks and formed a band while in Germany.
When?
In 1960, 64 maybe? 63, 64?
Okay, so they reunited in the 90s. That's still only 30 years.
That's still only 30 years.
Peanuts.
Bill Haley's Comets, without Bill Haley.
Well, yeah,
I don't know. They may have it.
All right. Anyway, Dusty Hill, ZZ Top, and not only he was a big wrestling fan. I think the other band members knew of it peripherally, but Dusty Hill was a big wrestling fan. We've talked about that sometimes in the past, but they also had the band an influence on the wrestling business. Not that they meant to necessarily, but they were a big part of the early MTV style, rock and roll style tag teams, because they're not only their music lent itself, as we'll talk about some of the entrances, but also the music videos that they were doing for MTV, because they had a budget and they were the cool car and the girls with the legs, right? And they were imitated. And now a lot of people think that the Fabulous Ones, which they did do the first ZZ Top videos, but the first Fabulous Ones video and music was Billy Squier, Everybody Wants You. And that's the way they were introduced, and they already got hot. And then they started doing the MTV style ZZ Top videos with the car, and they didn't have the budget, but they had a car and they got some legs, right? But it was enough. And then where it started snowballing, and obviously we've talked about if there hadn't been Fabulous Ones, there wouldn't have been a Rock and Roll Express. Ricky Morton and Robert Gibson were still already wrestlers, but they wouldn't have had the gimmick because the Fabs bred that gimmick for the secondary towns when Memphis was so successful. But Randy Hales, let me try this again. I love you, Randy Hales, but Randy West in Memphis, Randy Hales obviously was longtime announcer, promoter, etc. But Randy West, Jerry Jarrett's son-in-law, was the one that was editing the music videos at the time on Jarrett's editing equipment he had bought. He had the cameras, he had the 3/4 inch decks, etc. And Jarrett gave the inspiration for it, and then he'd have Randy go do his thing. Well, when Dundee became the booker in Mid-South and brought everybody down from Memphis, something we haven't actually talked about, I don't know whether we have, you may have on your other programs, Brian, was Watts had Jarrett fly Randy West down, try to show Joel Watts how to edit the music videos. The rock and roll music video for the baby faces, right? The Rock and Roll Express jump and all and for a while, as soon as Dundee started and the Memphis crew got there, they started doing music videos. They slacked off maybe a little bit toward the end of the year, but they did a bunch of them earlier that year. But bless him, Joel couldn't quite get the lighting right on something. But they tried to, for Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, they recreated, as the Fantastics, they recreated the Fabulous Ones videos that Stan Lane and Steve Kern had done in Memphis, which were recreations of the ZZ Top videos. But by the time that they got to the poor Bobby and Tommy in Mid-South, and Joel was, as I mentioned, a lighting genius. I remember one of them they did where they were in top hats and trying to do the ZZ Top thing like they were under a street light, and you could barely see the antique car and some girl's foot. Right? It was. But anyway.
What? I'm glad to hear you say this, because it's one of those things I would see and go, is it the tape? Is it my tape? Did I get a bad dub? What's going on? It's nice to hear you say this.
It looked that way when they first put it in the show. But it was poor Joel Watts trying to do his best. But anyway, but where that they obviously intersected with all this was that before in Memphis, it was just some music videos in Memphis and the surrounding area. But now that the Fantastics, Bobby Fulton and Tommy Rogers, and they debuted with the ZZ Top music, and they debuted with the ZZ Top videos, and they're using Sharp Dressed Man as their entrance on television and all the house shows. And the Mid-South television show airs in Houston, Texas, which just happens to be the home of that little old band from Texas. And Dusty Hill's watching Houston wrestling every fucking Friday night, right? Or was it on Saturday night then? Regardless, whatever. Saturday night, Sunday morning. So one night, and I don't know if Bobby Fulton, when he was on the show in the past, has told this story, maybe in one of his appearances, but one night they got the word, this was the summer of '84 when the Fantastics had come in at the Sam Houston Coliseum. Dusty Hill's out at ringside. He wasn't at ringside. He was actually in ringside. He bought tickets and he was sitting on the fifth row, right, with his wife, who was, as I recall, was a very short, tiny little woman. But anyway, they want to see you, or he wants to meet you. And see, the babyface and heel locker rooms, as we've said, were separate in the Coliseum. So I didn't know about this. We didn't know about it till afterwards. Bobby told us next time we were together. But Dusty, they thought as soon as they heard, oh my God, ZZ Top is out there. Dusty Hill wants to talk to us. We're using his music and we're doing his videos. Here comes the hammer of justice, right? Whoever the Stephen P. New of the day was is fixing to come down on. No, he loved them. He loved it. And he loved wrestling, and he asked them over to his house. And it was a fucking rib. I'm not saying like every single time they went to Houston, but there was a number of occasions that Dusty Hill would have the Fantastics over to his house either before or after the show in Houston, because he liked wrestling and loved that they were, doing that. And he didn't stooge them to the record company. So one thing we had talked on one of the shows a while back about, did any movie have more influence on wrestling than Road Warrior because of all the Lord Humonguses and the Road Warriors and, the Mad Maxes and et cetera, But think about from the Fabs to the Fantastics, and really with the Fantastics stuck with Sharp Dressed Man. The Fabs changed music a variety of times, but from that and all the other MTV-style tag teams and people starting to spread all the promotions doing those music videos, there was a ZZ Top influence on wrestling for a couple of years there in the early 80s when MTV had come around. But that tickled me that Dusty Hill, and that's the kind of guy he was, because I'll tell you some stories, because obviously my picture's with him in the Midnight Express book. But that's the kind of guy he would. To be a big rock star like that, he just went and bought his fucking ticket and was sitting in the fifth row ringside and, not trying to be a big deal. And back in those days, especially in Houston, Texas, I guess he didn't need security. But I didn't get to meet him first until when we had quit WCW at the end of 1990, and I was managing the Fabs actually back in Memphis for the angle with Lawler in January of 91, Cat Collins, my friend that was working for Deaf American, it was Rick Rubin's record company. He's the one who introduced me to Rubin. He knew that we were going in and out of Memphis, and I talked to him. He said, hey, we're going to be the Crows, the Black Crows, who Rubin had just signed for his record company. He didn't produce them. Their producer, what was his name? George Draculius, or a Greek name. But there was a little heat there because apparently after they had their first hit record that he didn't produce, but they were signed to his record company, they didn't like their contract they signed anymore. But anyway, Crows are on Deaf American. They're going to do 2 nights in Memphis because they're opening for ZZ Top at the Mid-South Coliseum. That was the Crows' first big tour, and after they'd had the first album, Shake Your Moneymaker. So he said, are you going to be in town? I said, I can be, because I was going to come in on Sunday anyway to make sure I was there for interviews and et cetera. So I figure I'll come in on Saturday and because they're there for 2 nights, I'll see the concert on Sunday, and then I'll be there for promos in the Coliseum on Monday, blah, blah, blah. So he said, okay, I'll get you a room. Rubin's paying for it, but it's you, so he won't care. So I went over to Memphis that Saturday and met with Cat. I think it was the Hyatt Regency downtown, if it's got a big atrium. And he said, no, I tell a lie. They had the show on Saturday night, and I met Cat at the hotel afterwards because they had got back before the show was over. And that's where we were going to the after party at the Rendezvous. So anyway, they said, we're all going over to the Rendezvous. So he takes me down. This is going to be a Black Crow story, but it's going to blend into a ZZ Top story. Is that okay? Are we running low on time?
No, this is great. Keep going.
All right. So anyway, he says, well, let's go down to the Crow's room, and they're going to take us over to the Rendezvous on the bus. Okay. So I go in, and he introduces me to these guys. And, is my friend Jim Cornette, blah, 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 shake everybody's hand. But he didn't say wrestling star or whatever. Well, I'm sitting over there. I'm not going to disrupt all these people that I've just met with their conversation, but I'm getting a ride over to the barbecue place. So they're talking, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, the guitarist, what was his name? Johnny Colt. He left the band after an album or 2, but he was sitting there and he was looking at me. All of a sudden, he said, you're Jim Cornette, the wrestling guy. I said, yes. Now it comes to find out he's from North Carolina. So he's, oh shit. But there's Chris Robinson who's sitting there, who's notorious for not putting a lot of shit over. And he married Goldie Hawn's daughter. What was her name? God damn it.
Kate Hudson. And then they divorced.
Yes, but just that he married her just for a minute is good enough for me to get him over with. But anyway, so Johnny Cole says to Chris Robinson, says, do you know who this is? And Robinson says, yeah, I know who he is. He's on TV. He's more famous than we are. I'm like, okay, so now that at least they know who I am. Anyway, that was a cool thing to say. But so we go to the Rendezvous. So Cat has told me, yeah, we're going to do the show tomorrow night, but, there's a little heat with the Crows. And apparently, I guess it's in the concert promoters' contracts or whatever. Maybe this wasn't even something that came directly from ZZ Top. But the Crows had completely separate locker rooms. The Crows people were not supposed to converse or consort with the ZZ Top people and vice versa. There was some kind of line of demarcation there, not just the band, but also the staff people and whatever. And, the Crows were kind of rolling their eyes about it. So we go to the Rendezvous and we're sitting there. They have the fantastic smoked sausage with that Rendezvous dry rub seasoning on it. Oh, my God. And we're eating. But ZZ Top comes in because they obviously were on last, so they got finished later. And they go and sit down at the other end of the big downstairs. You've never been to the Rendezvous, Brian, but it's all down in a basement underneath this old building where they years ago were doing renovations and found these barbecue pits, smoking pits and ovens, and opened the place up. So it's got all kinds of gimmicks and memorabilia all over it. Anyway, so the ZZ Top and their people's over at the other end of this room, and we're over here, and I'm eating my shit. And all of a sudden, a guy comes and taps me on the shoulder. He says, excuse me, Dusty wanted to know if you would come over and say hello. I said, oh, of course, because he had recognized me. I guess from just watching wrestling. So I go over to the table, and that's where, hello, how are you? Blah, blah, blah. He said, did you go to the show? I said, no, I just got into town. I'm going to the show tomorrow. Do you need tickets? I said, no, my friend Kat's fixed me up with everything. Thank you very much. And when I said my friend Kat, he kind of, shrugged it off. And I see Kat lingering behind me, right? And I'd pointed, I'd given the thumb. Yeah, my friend Kat. And, so we're talking about wrestling. What are you doing here? Well, I'm going to be at the Coliseum on Monday. We're doing a wrestling show there, blah, 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 some small talk. And then Dusty said, well, would you like to sit down with us? And I felt bad because I'm like, well, I'm supposed to be with these other guys and they're riding me around on their bus. I said, well, I'm really, they had invited me over here. But, oh, okay, well, just let us know if you need anything, because he's such a nice guy, right? What I didn't know was when he turned around and went to sit back down and I started to walk back over, Kat had been waiting to see if I would introduce him to Dusty Hill. Because I'm like, wait a minute. You're the fucking in the record business. You're the goddamn music guy. You're here on this tour and you've never met Dusty Hill. I've just met him. And you wanted me to introduce. He said, well, I've never met him. We were told to stay away from him. God damn it. So the next day, besides that's when I got to go on the tour of Grace. They set up a VIP tour of Graceland for the Black Crowes, and we went on the bus and got to go through Graceland, right? And they wouldn't let you take pictures with flash inside because it might, fade the colors of Elvis's zebra print furniture or whatever. But there's one story real quick, back to ZZ Top. There's a long hall I think down by the Jungle Room. There's a long hallway in Graceland where all of the gold records and the platinum records and the awards and the Grammy, whatever the fuck that you can hang on a wall that is won in the music business that Elvis Presley won, it's hanging there, right? So we're getting a VIP tour. It's just our group, and they know that this is a rock and roll band, right? But still, it's fucking Graceland and it's Elvis. The one guy that's being a little bit of a pill is Chris Robinson. And the tour guide goes down the hall and points this and says, this was the gold record given to Elvis Presley for sales of 1 million copies of something or other. And Chris Robinson says, got one. And then they walk down and say, well, this is the platinum record. It was given to Elvis for sales of such and such of such and such. Chris Robinson says, got one. And then the tour guide points at this big rectangular plaque on the record on the wall and says, and this is the special award given to Elvis Presley by RCA Records for sales of 100 million records. And everybody in the group, including his brother Rich, turns and looks at fucking Chris Robinson and he just, read him. So anyway, then we go to the show that night, and I got to sit on the fucking, equipment cases by the side of the stage and watch the Crows and watch ZZ Top, and then went back. That's where I got the picture taken with Frank Beard and Dusty Hill that's in the Midnight Express scrapbook, because Billy Gibbons had to leave early because somebody in his family was ailing or at something or other. So anyway, at that point, he said, well, I'm still in Charlotte, but I'm working on something else. And he gave me, here's my address. So I gave him my address. For 2 or 3 years after that, I got Christmas cards from Dusty Hill just because he had my address. But the thing, it wasn't, he signed it like it's a scribble, right? It's not like he has a great legible signature, but it wasn't like he's sitting down filling out all the envelopes and everything. I still have one of the envelopes because it's typed, and it's obviously somebody in his office has done it, but the way he entered me in his book was the way that the Christmas card was addressed. Jim Cornette, wrestling manager. Like the title of my job, and in my home street address, which at the time was 11129 Metacrest Drive, whatever. And then I guess he changed address books, and I didn't get any cards for a year or two. But then I saw him again in Johnson City, Tennessee. They played Freedom Hall. Oh, and by the way, it wasn't a month later that the Crows got fired from that ZZ Top tour that made all the headlines because the sponsor of the tour was Miller Beer. And fucking Chris Robinson went out and cut a fucking promo on Miller Beer, basically tasting like cat piss and swamp water, and got them fired off the fucking tour. And then they immediately went on their own because the album was getting big and they were pissed off that they were stuck underneath in an opening position, right? So there's intrigue in the music business too. Anyway, so then we go to Johnson City. I hear they're coming to Freedom Hall. This was in either 94 or 95 because we're running the building every month, right? And I see the advertisements. Well, while we were there one month, I just got some tickets from that. We're renting their arena every month, 12 times a year. So they came up off of a couple of ZZ Top tickets, and I knew the security people and the building manager. So when we got there, I just, sent word back. Can you tell Dusty I'm here? I brought some things for him if he'd like to get together. And they took us around, they had the radio meet and greet to do. And then afterwards, and then took us around to the other place with just 5 or 6 people. And I gave him some Smoky Mountain DVDs. I figured every little bit, I dropped Ruben's name, but I felt like every little bit helps. Let's see if he gets excited. And he said he was going to watch him on the bus, and I'm pretty goddamn sure he did. So I haven't seen him since that point in time, but at least for a while there, I was comforting myself to know that he was watching Smoky Mountain Wrestling on his tour bus. But he was a big wrestling fan, didn't they? He did. I don't know if they were the guest hosts or whatever promotion they were doing at the time, but didn't they appeared on an episode of Raw, 8 or 10 years ago, didn't they?
It's got to be at least 10 years ago. That was when they had like the Muppets host and Bob Barker and various people and ZZ Top who were actually wrestling fans, or at least, Well, I always heard Billy Gibbons was too, but maybe I'm wrong.
Well, apparently the guy that had his hand up Miss Piggy's ass was a wrestling fan also, but I don't know if that counts for the Muppets.
No, I don't know. I never heard anything about Frank Oz being a wrestling fan. But
I don't.
Hey,
wait a minute.
What?
Frank Oz?
Yes.
The Wonderful Wizard of Oz?
Frank Oz, a genius, was the man who had his hand up Miss Piggy's ass, as you put it.
Ah.
The voice of Miss Piggy, the voice of Cookie Monster and Grover.
That was Milt Henson or Don Henson or Don Henley. What was his name? Ted Hansen, Ted Danson.
Jim Henson?
Dan Hansen. Jim Henson.
Jim Henson. You almost got there. I should have let you keep going.
Let me just free association, baby. I'll get there.
No, Jim Henson was the voice of Kermit. He had his hand up Kermit's ass.
Oh.
Frank Oz also, of course, Yoda.
He was a noted frog fister.
And Yoda.
He fisted Yoda?
And then he became a filmmaker. Did you ever see What About Bob with Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss?
Actually, I don't think I did.
That was Frank Oz's movie.
Well.
And you can go watch it with a whole different set of eyes now because you find out, no surprise, Bill Murray and Richard Dreyfuss hated each other behind the scenes. So every scene there is legitimate tension between the two. But I wanted to mention, and by the way, very sad to hear about Dusty Hill. Eliminator is just such a iconic album.
Yeah.
Beyond wrestling even, just for that time period. It feels like that time period to me. It brings you back there. So many good songs on that album. You said
they were the hottest band in the land for 3 or 4 years there.
And you brought up the videos in Mid-South in 84. And the one that unfortunately follows me, and I hate it because, not too long ago, I had a great revelation. I love music. I listen to all sorts of stuff from all different years.
You love music?
But I never...
Any kind of music? You love music just as long as it's groovy?
Yes, sir. But what I was going to say was, I had never done a deep dive into the Jay Giles Band. And I saw some footage of them in the 70s. I was like, holy shit. This is amazing. All I knew was Peter Wolf in the Centerfold video. Looks like he's 45 years old and he's dancing around a high school. And then I see that old stuff. I'm like, it's amazing.
You never listened to 70s Jay Giles Band?
Until not too long ago. But I knew 2 songs. I knew Centerfold before that, and I knew Freeze Frame. And Freeze Frame is ruined for me because whenever I hear it, I just think of Terry Taylor all those different poses they had him doing for the fucking video.
Freeze frame. Oh, God. Yeah. And you know what? I never got to watch Joel shoot any of those videos, but I swear to God, I'd love to have been a fly on the wall for that one. When there's Joel Watts with Joel he was a nice guy, but he was, as Jim Ross described Bob Caudle one time, the epitome of a white kid. He said about white man about Bob, but I'm trying to see Joel Watts was the epitome of just a white meat kind of guy with that big Adam's apple trying to tell Terry Taylor how to strike those erotic poses for that video that all the women were going to flood the seats over.